Welcome to Connecting the Dots, a non-traditional legal program with your host and trusted advisor, Liz Myska, your guide through the web of life's dilemmas.
Welcome to Connecting the Dots. I'm your guest host, Virginia Schultz, and today we have two researchers from the Scapin's Eye Research Institute at Harvard that will be talking about driving and working with impairments and driving with vision loss. So welcome.
My background is as an optometrist. I did all my optometry training in the UK. And after I qualified, I worked for several years in the hospital where I worked with many people with vision impairment and learned a lot about the kind of challenges that they face in their everyday lives. And this kind of kicked off my interest actually in doing research to see how potentially we could help people with vision impairment make more use of their remaining vision. So I went to Glasgow Caledonian University, and did a PhD all about reading with vision impairment. And then after that, I was looking for a postdoc position, and I was lucky enough to get a postdoc position working with Dr. Pally at Scapin's. So I made the big move from Glasgow to Boston. And I've been working at Scapin's ever since. So when I moved to Boston, my kind of research diversified to get into the field of driving with vision impairment, because I think one of the things that we really see here in the US is just how important driving is for independence and quality of life. In Boston, we're lucky, we have quite a lot of public transportation, but in many parts of the States, there really isn't any public transportation to talk with. So that's my quick kind of background as how I got into this research area.
Okay. My name is Jing Xu. From my accent, you can see I original from China and grew up in China. I come here for my PhD education. I got my PhD degree in industrial engineering at Northeastern University. So during PhD, I did some research focused on human-machine interaction and driving safety, but mostly for young and normally sighted drivers. So after I graduated, and I found Alex and sent her my email and see if you need a postdoc. And then that's how I started. And Alex led me to the research and focus on the drivers with vision impairment, because vision is so important for driving. So we have been working together for more than 4 years. And during this time, and I got another fellowship and at the Vision Research Institute in Wichita, Kansas, which is a small non-profit organization and just specifically for people who are blind and visually impaired. And so in the past several years, we have been working closely together and was back and forth between Wichita and Boston, because I have an engineer background. So my research majority focus on using the virtual driving simulation to investigate how vision loss impair driving, and also how the current driver assistant technology in current cars and also future autonomous driving car features can support the like a daily mobility and transportation independence for people who are blind and visually impaired.
So you can see that we kind of have a good synergy, because I kind of have the clinical background and Jing has the kind of engineering background. So as we said, driving's really important. And one of the things that I guess really hit me when I first moved to the States was how the vision requirements for driving actually vary widely between states. So here in Massachusetts, we need to have 120 degrees of visual field extent, and you need to read down to the 2040 line on the letter chart in order to be eligible for a regular driving license. But if you go to New Hampshire, for instance, New Hampshire says nothing about field division. So this means that in New Hampshire, technically, you could drive if you had tunnel vision or very restricted peripheral vision. And the actual minimum level of visual acuity, that's your ability to see small detail, or how far down the letter chart you can read. The actual minimum level of visual acuity that's required for driving also varies widely across the states. And this surprised me when I first moved here. So there's kind of two aspects. One, it means that somebody who has restricted peripheral visual fields legally cannot drive in Massachusetts, but potentially could drive in New Hampshire, which may seem a little unfair. But also, the fact that many states actually permit people with some degree of vision impairment to drive offers a lot of opportunities for people with vision impairment, which are not available in many other countries. So, for instance, in Europe, really there's very little opportunity to drive with the levels of impaired vision that you can have here in various states. So these kind of differing regulations across the states without any real scientific basis to them was one of the things that kind of kicked off our interest in working in looking at vision impairment and driving. So we're kind of interested in questions such as how do different kinds of vision impairment affect driving, which driving skills do they affect, and then what is the minimum level of vision that is actually commensurate with safe driving. And then the other kind of big research area that we're looking at is trying to provide evidence or to evaluate whether optical devices can help people with different kinds of vision impairment when driving, or, as Jing was talking about, all the latest automotive technology, all these things that beep at you, etc., when you're driving, are they actually helpful for people with vision impairment? So one of the main tools that we use is a driving simulator. There are a variety of different ways that you can evaluate driving. One, obviously, is to do an on-road test. So you'd have a driving examiner sitting in the passenger front seat, and the person who's being tested driving the vehicle along a standardized route, and you'd score their driving at various points along the route. So that tells you a little bit about how people interact with traffic, etc., but it is only a snapshot of their driving, and they may feel uncomfortable because there's a driving examiner there in the car, it might not be their own car, etc. And also, if you're interested in looking at how vision impairment affects driving, there may be some safety considerations. And you don't have any control over the environment. So if you're interested in how well does somebody with vision impairment respond to potential hazards, which is obviously a significant concern, if they're driving out on the road, you have no control over when or where a hazard might appear. So that's why we kind of complement on-road studies with using a driving simulator. I think Jing can probably talk about some of the advantages of using a driving simulator.
Yeah, it's totally customizable, and we developed it from the scratch, and we can just replicate any kind of real life, majority of a real life environment, and then just put people in a safe environment to drive around the simulator, and we can get a lot of nice objective measures, which is kind of really hard to get measured on the road. And especially we are looking for drivers who have vision impairment. So with a driving simulator, we have eye tracker there, which can real-time monitor people's gaze behavior. You are looking at the pedestrian, you detect it or not, you miss it or not, and all their driving maneuvers. Yeah.
So I think the ideal thing about the driving simulator is it's a safe environment. we can program any kind of hazard that we want. It's safe, and importantly, it's repeatable, so we can give everybody exactly the same driving test, if you want to call it that. And as Jing said, we are very interested in finding out how people with vision impairment actually use their vision when they're driving. So you can imagine that some people who have blind areas in their field of vision, so one group of people that we work with have what's called hemianopia, which means that they've lost half of their vision on the same side in both eyes. So they see nothing on the left or they see nothing on the right. And this is hemianopia. It's commonly occurs after a stroke. You know, how people can be paralyzed down one side following a stroke, but it's the same thing. They can lose vision all down one side. And yet people with hemianopia are permitted to drive in some states. So you can imagine if you see nothing on one side of your vision, if there's a pedestrian here walking towards the curb about to cross the road, if that person is looking straight ahead and they've got no vision on this side, they're not going to see them. So they can compensate by moving their head and eyes and looking towards the side where they don't see. So we are very interested in how people with vision impairment, for instance, with this kind of visual field loss, actually use their vision and actually look to the side where they don't see. How well do they actually do that when driving? And so the driving simulator allows us to actually evaluate this, because we have a series of cameras which we can use to actually track the head and eye positions. So our simulator is, you can imagine that I'm sitting here driving in it. It's got big screens that surround me on which the virtual world is projected. I have a steering wheel and I have brake, gas pedals, etc. So it has all the controls of a normal automatic transmission car. It is a little bit like a video game, but you know, it's a great tool to use.
Definitely, yeah.
Do you also look at weather? Like, can you make it rain? Or
we can actually in that, in that
the reflections.
In that driving simulator, we can simulate all different kinds of weather conditions. So we talked there a little bit about how visual field loss, blind areas in your vision from hemianopia or from other diseases like macular degeneration. People with macular degeneration kind of have blind areas in the center part of their vision. So these blind areas can affect the ability to see and respond quickly to potential hazards when driving. And for people with macular degeneration, they also usually have reduced ability to see fine detail, so they can't read down to the bottom of the letter chart. So they may have difficulty actually seeing a hazard from the same distance that, say, we could. So that's another reason that they may be slower to respond. And they often also have difficulty in conditions of poor contrast. So where you've like fog, or if you've got, you know, kind of somebody wearing dark clothes, grey clothes on a grey day, kind of thing. So, I mean, there are other aspects of driving that are important, such as staying in the correct lane, etc. But a main focus of our research over the last several years has been really looking at how different kinds of vision impairment affect the ability to detect and respond to hazards. I don't know if you'd like to talk a bit more about that.
Yeah, that's good. And I would say another important research tool actually we're using in the past several years, as we discussed earlier, actually is telephone interview. That's a special thing we started during the pandemic because we can now do the in-lab data collection. So yeah, we spent in the past 2 years, we almost talked to, I believe it's more than 300 different drivers with different type of visual impairment across the country. And that's really great actually to learn their real life experience, how vision loss impact their driving, and how they develop different strategies actually to cope with their daily driving difficulties, and what are the most difficult situations they are facing with, and they are willing to get support from, and what are challenges they are having now actually when using car technologies and driving in general. Yeah, it's really nice experience, and for us to learn from those type of real life experience from different type of people with different type of vision loss.
And then the kind of final method that we use in our research is what's often called naturalistic driving. So this is kind of newer, should we say, method of evaluating driving. Basically, we put a small dash cam into somebody's own car and ask them to drive with this camera in their car for several months at a time. So typically there's a camera that faces towards the driver and also a camera that faces out of the car. So we can record the road scene ahead as well as the driver's behaviour. And the advantage of this method of evaluating driving is that obviously you get a lot of data, but you actually capture people's everyday driving behaviours, which you don't necessarily fully capture if they're doing an on-road test or if they're sitting in the driving simulator. I mean, the downside is that you get volumes and volumes of video data. So you can imagine that it requires a lot of technical expertise and people who are really good at programming to actually pull out of the video the segments that we're most interested in. I mean, for instance, I drove here today from Boston. I spent, 40 minutes driving on the turnpike, and it's like there's really not that much interesting going on. So we did one study using this naturalistic driving approach with a colleague, Gang Lo, who also works at Scapens and also has an engineering background. And we looked at how people who have central vision loss, so reduced visual acuity, difficulty seeing small details, who can, in many states, are permitted to drive with a small telescope. It's called a bioptic telescope. It's a little magnifying telescope put at the top of their spectacle lens. So we use this naturalistic driving methodology to evaluate how they actually use the telescope when they were driving. So most of the time, they don't look through the telescope. They actually look underneath the telescope through the regular part of the lens. So most of the time, they're actually driving with their own low vision. And occasionally, if they want to see some detail, say on a road sign, they dip their head briefly to look through to get the magnified view through the telescope, and then go back to looking through the regular part of the spectacle lens. So these bioptic telescopes are now actually permitted for driving in about 49 states. But what we saw from this naturalistic driving study was that in actual fact, people spent very little time, only about 1% of their driving time, actually looking through the little telescope. So that kind of information we wouldn't have got through any of the other kinds of methodologies that we have looked at. So that's...
Are there any other devices that are allowed that now are allowed, like that telescope that people could use in their cars?
Right. So, I mean, the bioptic telescope actually, over recent years, it's the area where there has been the most kind of active changes in driving regulations. So there have been, I think it's 6 states in the last 10 years that have permitted bioptic driving. Texas was the most recent in 2021. So that's probably the best recognized kind of optical device to help. For people who have hemianopia, the loss of half the field of vision, there are prism glasses, peripheral prism glasses, also sometimes called the Peli lens, which actually provide some field expansion into the side where they don't see. So basically it kind of provides like an early warning. From the prism, they get some information to let them know that there's something over there on the side where they don't see, which acts as a cue for them to turn their head and look at whatever it is. So these prism glasses are not, as far as I'm aware, specifically noted in any driving regulations to be specifically permitted to help, but we certainly do have evidence from some driving simulator studies and an on-road study that people with hemianopia who drove with these prism glasses were quicker to see and respond to hazards on the side where they don't see. People also, if they feel that their vision is getting worse, they also start to adopt their own strategies.
Right. And many, from what we have learned from talking to those drivers, what I have learned is a lot of them, so either they can have the bioptic telescope glasses restricted with restricted driving range, and many of them just developed some strategies, coping strategies, like I'm gonna avoid night driving. For example, if people have macular degeneration, it's kind of hard for night driving, and or avoid long distance highway driving. Or even just trying to avoid, for example, intersection is really difficult. Avoid making left turns and negotiating with all the cars and the pedestrians, and avoid driving rush hour, heavy traffic. And it's just they have to develop all those type of coping strategies. So one of my participants actually who told me, I give you an example, and this gentleman has 20/180 vision, and he told me, 20/200 is close to legally blind.
Right.
So just to give an idea, 20/200 means that on an old-fashioned letter chart, you can just see the top letter. So the person that Jing's just going to talk about, basically that was his level of vision.
So he told me, okay, it's for example, like 15 minutes, 20 minutes drive from I go to your lab to do the driving experiment, and I have to do the 30 minutes plan ahead. So he's trying to plan a driving route, for example, not facing to the sun, because bright sunlight is because he have macular disease, very sensitive to the sunlight, and he would even actually choose a driving route only include like a right turns or protected left turns, because as I mentioned earlier, negotiating all the traffic and the pedestrians as unprotected intersection left turns is really hard for him. So it's just developed all those type of coping strategies to support his daily driving.
So I mean, I think if people notice that their vision is starting to get worse, one of the sensible things that you can do, because we want to enable people to keep driving for as long as possible, because driving is so important, even if it's only just driving to the grocery store.
Right.
But at the same time, we don't want people to be a danger to themselves or to other road users. So when vision starts to get worse, one strategy that people can use for themselves is to limit their driving. Right. And as Jing was saying, to avoid situations that they know are going to be difficult for them. So if they're very sensitive to the light, not driving on a very bright sunny day, or if they, have difficulty in very busy traffic situations, just avoid that. Don't drive in the rush hour. Right. So those kind of self-restrictions can be a good way to kind of continue driving, but to try to avoid the situations that are going to be difficult.
Well, that's wonderful advice. We're getting to the end of the segment. If you could tell people how they might be able to get a hold of you. I am assuming you might want people to participate, whether impaired or not, in some of your research. Maybe wrap it up a little bit, what the next little project is, and we have about a minute and a half. Wrap that up and give them contact information. That'd be great.
Yeah, so we are always looking for people who would be willing to come into the lab to participate in our studies. We look for people who have what we would call normal vision. Glasses, contact lenses, etc. are fine. And then we're always looking for people who have different kinds of vision impairment. And at the moment, we have studies going on, particularly where we're looking at how hemianopia, the loss of half the field of vision, affects driving. But we also have studies where we're looking at how macular degeneration or other conditions that reduce the ability to see fine detail affect driving. So these are all in the driving simulator. So I'm always happy to get telephone calls. My office telephone is 617-912-2512. And you'll see me glancing down there just to make sure that I said it correctly.
All right.
I think that's the easiest way to contact us. I'm not going to try to give you my email address. It's really difficult just speaking it
or you can
out loud.
Also search Bowers Laboratory at Skippens.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. We have so much wonderful information. We're going to have to bring you back for another segment, but thank you everyone out there for joining us for Connecting the Dots. Be well.
Welcome to Connecting the Dots, a non-traditional legal program with your host and trusted advisor, Liz Myska, your guide through the web of life's dilemmas.
Look at you. You're at the top of your game. At work or at play, you're unstoppable. Nothing can throw you off track. Oh, hey, she's cute. Nice going, man. Things are going great for you. You've earned a night out. Good drinks, good friends. Yeah, we can go ahead and call this a good night. Wait, is that your car? Uh-oh. Not smart. Yeah, I saw that coming. Say goodbye to her. Ouch, that'll hurt your bank account. You're looking at around 10 grand in fines, legal fees, and increased insurance rates. I hope you like eating frozen dinners. Alone. Let's try this again. Smart move. Because buzz driving is drunk driving.